And what are you willing to do? Finally, the part I really like, anti-racism is a new or newish expression for me. Racial justice is not, racism is certainly not. But anti-racism to me is action. It's not enough. When you embrace that and you say it is not enough to just not feel that way yourself or believe you don't feel that way yourself. If you are anti-racist, you cannot look away. You cannot look away from injustice. You cannot look away from unfairness. I hear these new expressions, microaggression. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean because I don't know about being just a little offended or just, but I think that just the notion, and I've talked to teenagers and kids that are in high school, they want to do what's the work we can do to kind of clear ourselves. Because, and I'll end with this, and hopefully maybe you'll all give it some thought. In my over 50 years as an adult and a professional, there have been a number of occasions when I have described myself or been described as a descendant of slaves. In all of these same years, I have never heard anyone describe themselves as descendants of slave owners. And therein is your messy conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Brenda. And I think we will marinate on those words, as Reverend Cecil Chip Murray would say. And maybe we could turn it over to David to go on for facilitation. Once again, thank you.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Brenda. We have a couple of questions, not many actually, in our chat. So if you want to try to get in a question, we have some time. The clearest question, I think, is from Clarence, who is interested in what does defunding the police look like here in Los Angeles? But that's not the actual question. What's your question, Clarence?
Well, first of all,
Clarence, how are you?
Hey, Brenda, I miss seeing you.
I saw you when I knew you were coming because I saw you when I looked at the other one.
I miss so much. I miss running into you. I'm so happy that you're in the mayor's office and you're doing great things for us as a whole. I suffered like a lot of people during the pandemic, sitting at the screen watching the mayoral press conference every day at 12:15, whatever time it was. And after the George Floyd incident, our mayor pledged to take an amount of monies from the LAPD and put it into meaningful ways in the African-American community. And my first thought was, okay, it's 25 cents. How can the city take this 25 cents and put it in meaningful places to be used in a way that would be more impactful? And I thought, okay, well, I wonder what the criterion is and where will they put this money, and will they encourage partnerships and some kind of strategic allowances where these organizations and entities are already doing great work in the community, so that they can meet a lot of the needs because the need is so great. So I was just curious because I've never asked the question publicly to any of the rooms that I go in, and it's so good to have you here with us so I could ask you directly. But I'm just curious to know if part of that criterion or part of the ways that you guys are directing that money.
Well, it's in the motion in the sense that it is the $150 million out of $1.8 billion was taken from the police budget. So let's put it in perspective, okay? Yes, it is that, and they did it with certain. Some of that money was reprogrammed within the police department to do, and I think you've heard about it, community service policing at the public housing developments, where really there's a model that the Advancement Project and Connie Rice came up with some years ago, where you have police officers in certain communities, particularly like the housing developments, and they're there as police officers, but they're also there to, on a long, like a 5-year assignment, so that you don't have just people rotating in and out. You have people who are there, and people often volunteer, people who want to work with the community, who want to build the trust. And they created a new deputy police chief role for that to roll out, not at the public housing. It's something that's being looked at. It's a model that's been considered very positively, where it's been used in different places. So that's some of it. But there's still probably like, I don't know, 90 million or more that will be spent in different ways. One of the ways was in a meeting today, they're talking about, because it comes out so often, when you have people who have mental illness and their families are forced to call the police, that the police are not those, and I think you've seen 2 or 3 killings in the last 10 days of people who, one guy, the family, he was known in the community, but he was advancing with a small knife or whatever. It should not have been a police confrontation like that. There should have been, and when resources are available in the past, you have a social worker who comes out along with maybe someone who is a counselor. You have the police, but the police are there for if something really goes terribly wrong. But often, if you have an intervention by someone who is skilled and understands the population, who they're dealing with, and comfortable in the community, that a lot of those, what I regard as unnecessary deaths and homicides, could be avoided. The city and the county are working together and contributing resources to roll out a pilot that will do that. The county in the past, through the Department of Mental Health, had limited resources. They did it when they could, but this is now recognizing that every situation, every confrontation does not require immediate police intervention, but there's a training and there's a sense of trust that is built in the community, and that's what happens. That's something that will happen over time, and it is only going to be as good as the goodwill on both sides. There will also be funds available, and I'm really can't speak on behalf of the city council, but I know that just as we have the gang reduction youth development programs that were funded, looking at funding more of those programs, but also to have them be COVID related, in that a lot of this, the tracing that needs to go on, a lot of the things that people from the community would have greater access and likely greater success in in following through. Because you have your homicide rates, but you also have the incredible death rates of Latinos, Blacks, and particularly Asian Pacific Islanders as related to COVID. And so the contact tracing is very important. There'll always be never enough resources and sort of competition, but I think that these ideas came from a consortium of community-based nonprofits, and that it's almost was presented almost like a menu. And as resources come, as we pray they will, to cities and counties and states after the first of the year, then programs like that will be welcome, because they're also a way to create community infrastructure, and they're a way to create new jobs and the like.
And thank you for that exchange. Mary has a question about the political efficacy of language like anti-racism. Mary, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for the time, Brenda. I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to ask a question.
Oh, there you are. Great.
Okay, so I was thinking about James Baldwin and his articulation around the pillars of white supremacy, and one of those being the maintenance of white innocence. And then I'm thinking about the term anti-racism, and as you articulated, it draws a very clear line between those who are racist and those who are anti-racist. But I'm concerned with like what I call the neoliberal capture, in the sense that people will say, well, I'm an anti-racist in the terminology, but won't do the work to actually create a society that is in fact anti-racist. So how does these terms move beyond terminology and move to action-oriented type solutions is more so my question.
Well, yeah, I'm all for what you just said, to action. We have, I mean, there's the most recent study I've seen is something called, what is it? No Going Back LA. And it was funded by major foundations. And it's Gary Segura from the Luskin School and Manuel Pasteur from USC. And it's looking, just as there's another huge report called The Portrait of Black Los Angeles. The challenges, the issues, all of that is there. In my opinion, what's missing are those two things that always go together: political will and resources. And I think that the demonstrations, I think that conversations like this, I think that the biggest challenge is to stay the course, and when there are no demonstrations, when it's moved on to whatever the next issue is, that we must move forward with actions that I'm just currently finished reviewing the racial equity plans for all of the departments in the city of Los Angeles. And you know, it's good to have data. Data is informing. Data is you can measure. Data is this. But often data doesn't tell you anything your own eyes can't see. And when it comes to issues around systemic and institutional and structural racism, the data just confirms so often what is otherwise obvious. So when you go to the question, I would start, like the next time they fund a study, start with the action. Assume all the other studies are correct. Are certainly correct enough to go ahead and move, because it's about jobs. I mean, some of it it's so simple and yet sadly seems so impossible. But education, employment, health, housing, safety. You don't need a class. Just think about all the things that each of us needs every day to feel good about ourselves, to feel as though we're making a contribution to our communities and to our families, and to have a sense of moving ahead. Whatever those things are for you, that is the action that must be taken to address institutional, structural racism. That is when you start to move toward anti-racism, the affirmative action of doing things that allow the rest of the community to enjoy, be aware of, and appreciate the quality of life that's available to so many others, but denied people of color and African-American people particularly. So when you want to know something to do, think about how to make a job for somebody. Think about how to develop. We're working on housing and homelessness now and all the different ways to provide people shelter. Think about mentoring. Think about education. Think about the student loans and how to, all the things that we personally solve because we have the wherewithal. Those are the things that we're anti-racist. We will make all of that available to everyone.
Thank you. I thought that was a terrific question and an important part of our conversation. Jana has a comment sort of on the same line about what Antioch can do to move us into action. Do you want to ask or make your comment, ask your question, Jana?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Just really, I would really love to connect with other Antiochians and perhaps, form some kind of group that we can communicate with each other and really, because I'm very much solution oriented, very much action oriented, and to really start checking things off our list, to create something perhaps for next year. Okay, what are our, kind of most pressing concerns at our campuses, and creating a checklist and start acting on it. And I think that's what when we have these conversations, I feel like they haven't gotten quite messy yet because we're missing this kind of push a little bit, this action oriented, list of, okay, let's start checking these things off our list. Because as much as I'm doing things within my own community, there's so much power in the group energy. And, most of us are either students or alumni at Antioch. So yeah, I guess for me, it's just more, how can we, and would there be others interested, and who would we contact to begin this kind of larger group? To create to check off some things.
So sort of in the interest of time, I might just quickly respond to that. So I'm so glad that you raised the action issue. So these messy conversations are a place for things to happen, right? And so our hope is that people meet each other and say, wow, that person's interesting. I want to work with them. I want to do this. I want to get, I want, anything. So use this as a place to generate other stuff, and reach out to any of the planning team, Elaine, Anna, Kirsten, myself, Sarah Beth, and we'll do our best to help put people into touch with one another. Mihi Hyun has a question about Proposition 16, which is a really important prop on the ballot right now.
I know, I'm obsessed with this. I just also wanted to say to Jana that the Anti-Racism Task Force, which is a university group, is designed to do some of that work, and they're getting going right now. So I know that they're going to talk to students and faculty and lots of folks so soon on that as well. Yeah, to me, it's really clear, also to Amiri's question before, that this is a really concrete way that people can get engaged and give up some privilege towards rectifying some of these issues. And I see it very clearly in higher education. I guess I'm curious on the government side, what kinds of things that this might help address, Brenda, from the passage of this, how this will impact, as I understand, small businesses, business contracts, but I'd be interested to hear more specifics about the larger impact of that.
Sure. Well, I actually am trying to gather information that predates 1996, just to compare what was happening in the city, its employment, its contracting, and the like. But after the passage of 209, there was a real chilling effect, so that people, they overcompensated. They wouldn't do anything, when that's not really what it says. But the city's charter was changed so that you can do small business, you can do disadvantaged businesses. You just can't have the racial component of it as what's defining. The notion of but what became this sort of general thing that affirmative action was somehow bad or it was wrong, and people were afraid to reach out and to embrace it. Proposition 16 is unapologetic. Proposition 16 just puts it right out there and says that it is in fact yet another tool. It's not the only thing that would be used. No one's wholesale throwing out the processes by which contracts are given by the city or admissions to the university, but it does give that breadth. And in many ways, you all know, you've followed how, even the SAT and the cultural bias there. I mean, there has been, in these 24 years, there's been an evolution of thought about really what is fair and what is needed and what is a good predictor of a person's abilities. The return or the restoration of affirmative action is in many ways, it's a signal. It's our own, it's almost like the reverse of a dog whistle. It's a signal that it's all right to acknowledge who you are. You can be credited for whom you are and what your experiences are. And it is equal to many of the other ways that people are also considered. I mean, no one, until the scandal at USC, I'll pull that out, meow, meow. The legacy, the legacy admissions, come on. I mean, I was so humored when a very famous entertainer sort of scoffed at the fact that his daughter got in without having to have any help, extra help. But you gave them $90 million last year for a building. So, in a certain way, messy conversation is also sort of a euphemism for honest conversation. And for that, I really commend you. And affirmative action, there's been all kinds of affirmative action, just not on behalf of those who needed it the most.
Thank you. We got time for a quick question. There's an early question that's posted by Lolly about your family history. You want to ask that question, Lolly?
Where's Lolly? Oh, there's Lolly. Unmute.
There we are. I know I was punching the wrong thing. Yeah, no, my question was just simply, were your parents married when your father went to the CO camp? And how old was he? I was just curious about that. I don't know much about the CO camps during World War II.
How old was he?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. My parents, yes, my parents were married. They're both from Tennessee.
Right.
My father actually, at the time, was at Pasadena City College. He was at Pasadena City College, and he had already, before he left Tennessee, he had already told the draft board that he would not be going. And then it took some time for the process. In the meantime, we came to California, but they knew, and in the process of it, then there was a date when it was prison. You had to surrender, and he went back. We were in Tennessee with my grandparents while he was in New Jersey at a CO camp. He was at another camp that was very interesting because it was right next to an internment camp.
Oh,
So when he had gone, when he came back and went to USC, he lived in the International House, and actually one of his roommates was a gentleman who had been in the internment camp and was a minister. And when they were all over here at USC, at the university.
So probably when he went to the camp or whatever, he was maybe like 19 or 20 years old.
No, he was older than that. No,
Oh,
he was 23.
23. Okay, so he was very young. Yeah.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
23.
Okay. That was it. I was just curious. Yeah, it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, no, he's a special man. He's a very special man.
Yeah.
So thank you. So we've reached 5 o'clock, which is our formal ending time. So we want to formally thank Brenda Shockley, the Deputy Mayor, and Elaine Parker-Gills for being our conversationalist this late afternoon, early evening. Really, really a treat to have you here. And as my colleague Mihi says, just such a wealth of great information and just all the great work you're doing for the city. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Our custom is that we invite you, should you have the time, to hang out for a few more minutes. A lot of people have to go, but we often just have an informal conversation for a little bit. So anybody who wants to hang around for the informal conversation, feel free to do so. For the rest of you, try to come back next week. The topic is going to be mindfulness and racial justice. Should be a really good conversation. And tell your friends. We're getting off to a bit of a slow start this fall. And so tell your friends, bring some people along. I promise you a lively conversation next Monday. Thank you for coming out today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brenda.
Okay.
So you guys did a great job. Elaine and Brenda.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
No, really did a great job, and just so informative on local issues and state issues around these props. So
Prop 16, Prop 15 and 16.
So can I chime in and ask a question?
Sure.
Brenda, you talked about your history, your long history of being part of the social justice movements in Los Angeles and in the country. And when I think back on all, and Elaine too, you've both been there for many different cycles of social protest. And I sometimes wonder, are we going in circles or are we moving forward? I just love to know what you think about this, because of course I want to be optimistic, but I need some help.
Well, I don't, I think, and I don't know from physics, but, I think we make those circles and you make some progress. And that's what I mean about guarding the advances.
Yeah.
Because then you still end up losing, and each time you move a bit more. What I see different this time is the how inclusionary the protests are. Because I think in the 50 years that we were talking about, you've seen, we're talking about women's right to choose. I mean, all of it has to do with the rights that individuals and groups have, despite what the quote majority prefers. That's when it becomes a right, is when you don't have to go with the group. And I think that when you have the LGBTQs and you have choice and you have women's rights and you have we all see the commonality, which to me makes it so different from those who focus on the differences. That this is, and it is intergenerational, because people like Elaine and myself, we're still as adamant as ever, but you also see how it's growing. And I think that there's a old Black saying, it may not be when you want it, but it's always right on time. And that's what I bring to it. I don't think that you can unring the bell. I think that at least for some time, assuming things go in a halfway sane way on November 3rd, absent that, that there will be that impetus that will carry, and that we have to be cognizant enough of the past to protect what we're building, or, well, in my case, what is going to be built going forward. So I'm mad, but I'm also optimistic, and I know there's no choice. There is no stopping.
Thank you. Yes, there is no choice. What we have to move forward and find our optimism and hold it close. But I think it's so interesting what you're saying about the solidarity across different causes is much more of a reality than it was in the past, I think. I think that we are seeing this a much greater sense of solidarity today, and that is something to be inspired by.
There's a recognition that it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, yeah.
And when that recognition, you don't run out of fairness. You don't run out of equity.
Right.
And I think that the sort of, as you described, the messy conversations are when people starting to feel honest and open enough to air, and safe enough to air their grievances.
Yeah.
I've lived in Los Angeles, all my pretty much as long as I can remember. And I, other than having to do a 4th grade mission project, like probably everybody else on this call, I had no idea until recently when they started tearing down the monuments in California, Buenos Aires. I had no idea. I had no idea about others that I'm learning about, and now I'm very curious about and starting to understand. I didn't know, as much as I call myself reading African American, this, that, and I didn't know the history of slavery in the state of California, a state that was to be a free state, but because they wanted to attract people, including police, to this state, they let them bring their slaves. But if ever the slave was either freed and had to earn and pay, or where the city of Glendale, which is right next door to Eagle Rock, where I went to college and knew better than to cross Colorado Boulevard, apologized for being a, quote, official sundown city. Black people dare not be there come sundown.
Brenda, a lot of what you're saying in response to Kirsten, it reminds me there's of a feminist ethicist named Sharon Welch. And she was trying to develop a feminist ethics that was rooted in Black women's literature. So she looked at Black women authors and what's the ground of their ethics, and she came up with this idea of an ethics of risk rather than an ethics of control. But at the heart of it was this idea that you may work your whole life on an issue, on a racial justice issue, and by the time you die, things may be worse than when you started. That's the nature of things. And so our obligation is to make sure that we put into place the structures and institutions so that the struggle can continue. That not whether or not we achieve our goal during my lifetime or your lifetime, but is the platform there for the struggle to continue? So your comments made me think of that.
Well, thank you again. And I'm going to excuse myself. I have a 94-year-old mother who Elaine knows, who lives around the corner, and she's expecting me.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you so
Brenda,
much.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elaine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Elaine.
You're welcome. Take care.
And tell your mom hi for me.
I will. Take care.
Nice job, folks. Nice work, David.
Yeah,
That
for
was
everything. Yeah.
awesome.
Vote early, vote often.
I know.
Well, someone's
Thank you
going to have to replace those ballots that got burned up last night.
Where was that, Clarence?
What happened?
Does anyone know the actual, they called it, I don't know the neighborhood, they called it Baldwin Park, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the neighborhood?
I think so. Where the fire,
Yes, the fire.
somebody put, yeah.
They
I'm sure
burned
it's
a
going to
bill?
happen more often.
That's not too far from Antioch, is it?
No.
No, that's
Man,
quite a ways up.
Not Baldwin Hills, Baldwin Park.
I thought Baldwin Park was near too, but okay, maybe that's further downtown. Anyway, we don't need any of that shenanigans going on, do we?
No.
So I didn't hear the story. So did they set a ballot collection box on fire?
Yeah.
They put newspaper that was on fire into the box, so it burned several ballots. And of course, the fire department trying to put it out wet up, a lot of ballots. They think it was maybe only 100 or so ballots, but still, it's 100 people whose, ballots may not get counted. So hopefully they got the news and they can request a new ballot,
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Well, and these things are happening all over the country, one way, shape, or form. It's not all isolated. I'm sorry to hear that, Clarence. I appreciate you letting us know. We do have to make sure we vote. Probably not more than once, though, David. Though I know the feeling.
I actually thought we were the only city that had the fake, boxes that the, the GOP organization put out. But I was talking to a former boss of mine in Atlanta, and they have them there too.
Right. Oh, yeah. They do.
I'm really wrong about that. All right, I've got to go too. I don't have a 94-year-old mother, but it's a pleasure seeing all you folks. Elaine,
Thank you for
David,
coming.
thanks, and Kirsten, thanks for putting this together, everyone. Good seeing you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
We
guys.
love having you here.
You all drive safely.